Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about evening routines. Now, we've talked about morning routines before on the podcast. Morning routines, they turn our focus outward as we look at the day. But one of the things that we want to do in our evening routines is turn our focus inward. We look at our families, we look at our homes, and we try to cultivate rest and relaxation as we come to a quiet place at the end of the day. I hope you'll join me for this episode of the podcast. Welcome to A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. We know that in the hectic hurry of everyday life, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. This is a moment to pause and realign your focus on the one who gives us peace and rest. We're focusing on discipleship, productivity, and homemaking as we live with eternity in mind. This is the place where you'll learn to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher. Thanks so much for joining me. Hey everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 24 of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fletcher, and today we are talking about building a better evening routine. Our evenings are so important, but honestly, they're often squandered. As we come home, we're tired, we just want to sit and do something mindless to get our minds off of what we've done that day. But what we're going to be talking about today is how you can use your evening routines to help set the stage for the mornings, but also how to use them to turn your focus inward towards your home and create habits that cultivate connection in your families, in your homes, and also cultivate a little bit of rest in the day. Your evenings are just as important as your mornings. If you are interested in creating a schedule that works for you, you can get our ideal schedule guide at amorebeautiful.collective.com/AMBL shop. You can also find lots of resources there to help you create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. Now, as we think about our routines, this is the last episode in our little mini series on getting your year started off right. And as we finish up the holiday seasons, I think it's important to take a break sometimes from the routines that you create, right? We have this time of celebration and feasting, times where you are just off of your normal routine, but it's something that is so important to do. It kind of breathes new life into your life. But then as we get back into routines, I think it's a good opportunity to analyze what is worth having and what is not worth having. We can't always live in that perpetual state of celebration and feasting. If you have young kids and you just went through the holiday season, you know what a relief it is to kind of get back into your routines. Because a lot of times whenever you're out of routine, especially for young kids, toddlers and young children, if you are out of your routine for long enough, they can become crazy because they're just not used to that little sleep. And for me, I know even if I put my kids to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock because we were out and about visiting family or something, the next day they're still going to be up at 6:30 or 7. So, there's just this time where, yes, it's good to celebrate and take breaks from your routine every now and then. We know that there's a comfort in going back to our routines. We have them for a reason. And so as we've been talking about routines on the show, we talked about our morning routines, and then we have been looking at different ways to create habits that help us to do the things that we want to do in our lives. I think it's important to think about how we prepare for our mornings. And that is really done in our evenings. I think morning routines, they're kind of the thing that most productivity people talk about. People that are talking about, how you can accomplish more in your day. They always focus on the mornings, but really our evenings, they set us up for good morning routines. But then they also do so much just in their own right of creating habits that can really affect our family culture, and they can affect the rest of our life as well. So our evening routine is what sets you up for a positive outcome the following day. A good evening routine will do several things for you. They're going to help you wind down from a busy day of work. They're going to help you connect with your family. They're going to do things that rejuvenate you, that help you to keep going. And they're also going to set you up for the best sleep that you can have that night. And so for all of these reasons, your evening routine is just as important as your morning routine. An evening routine can lead to more restful sleep. It can lead to higher productivity levels and a better mental health. And it's makes it so much easier to have that life-changing morning routine that we talked about a few episodes back on the podcast. We all recognize the importance of having a solid bedtime routine for our kids. It helps them clue their brains into the fact that it is time to be going to bed, and so they need to start winding down. But really, we operate the same way. We never really grow out of that need of a solid bedtime routine. Marguerite Ward and Aaron McDowell said that the last thing you do before bed tends to have a significant impact on your mood and energy level the next day, and it often determines the amount of sleep that you have and the quality of sleep that you have. It can be difficult to fall asleep when you're stressed, and this is especially true now as we have, rising anxiety levels and just lots of things going on where we're all spread kind of thin. There are some strategies that you can adopt that help you to relax before bed. Good bedtime routines are key for successful people who depend on getting enough sleep to help them get through their busy days. So I think many of us, we try, and sometimes we often fail at creating a good morning routine. And we think, why can't I do this? Why can't I wake up on time and do the things in the morning that I want to do? But really, if we want to do all of these things in the morning, like prayer and reading your Bible and chores and exercise, cleaning, if we want to do all these things in the morning, we have to think about what our evenings look like. We can't neglect our evenings because they set us up for success. From the moment that you get home from work or, you start those evening routines, normally that's probably dinner time is when you really start that routine. You can begin to add restful practices in your day that rejuvenate you, that set you up for success. And this is ultimately what our evening routines should do. By being intentional about our evenings, we're developing something life-giving for us. If we want to accomplish much in our lives, we need to have time in our day that helps fill us back up. So our mornings are the preparation time. They're the time from the moment that we wake up to the time that we start our day or walk out the door for work. They're the place that we go to launch us into our day. And so again, if you do a good morning routine, you'll be able to tackle what life throws at you. A lot of times people, and I've heard this said before, it's like if you do a good morning routine, you could accomplish everything productively that you want to do in that day, in that time period. So for me, that's where we talk about, I try to read my Bible, I try to do some reading in that time, I try to get some chores knocked out that I need to get done to help propel me through the day, that if I just did those chores, the house would kind of stay in a state of order. Your morning routine, they prepare you for the day to make your day go well. But your evening routines are not really that time. They help set you up for a good morning routine, but your evening routines really aren't you revving up to get more done, to be more productive. They're not trying to launch you into anything. Instead, your evening routines are your time where you wind down. It's a time to turn inward and to retreat. And so what that means is that we need to create a home that is a safe haven to come back to. And we also need to develop solid routines that help us unplug, unwind, and slow down, that provide that rest in the day. So our mornings, those are those times that we work on those personal goals. It's where we have our quiet time, our exercise, you shower, you get ready for the day. And really, I think a lot of this, it's your time kind of for yourself to deal with those personal goals. But your evenings, I think, are the time that we have for connection. There are times for connection with your family, with your friends, with your spouse. And so I think really our evening routines, instead of focusing on our goals and trying to achieve more in that time, we really need to focus on our relationships. And this is where we often can teach our families what we value using this time, especially if your kids attend public school. Like, this is the time that you have from dinner time to bedtime. That is the time that you have for discipleship. So you need to be mindful of what you do with that time. This is the key time to connect with your family. So the first thing we always have to do is we have to ask ourselves, what do your evenings currently look like? Our evenings are probably the most valuable part of your day, because in the evenings, we cook, we clean, we help with homework, we do our work, we connect with friends and family, we go to church. If you have like a Wednesday night Bible study, we visit friends, we hang out at restaurants, we watch sports, and we lounge around the house. Unlike our mornings, I think our evenings, they're not what we do daily, like a daily routine. I've talked about the habit stacking that I do in the mornings, where I have this rhythm of something I do every single day whenever I wake up. But really, your evenings, they kind of look like that because you eat dinner every day and you go to sleep every day. But they're a lot more variable. I think they operate more of like on a weekly schedule rather than a daily schedule. So, your Sunday evenings might be your prep day where you have your Sabbath throughout the day where you're at church and maybe spending time with family, but then you're getting ready for your week, whether that's homeschooling or getting your kids ready for school. Maybe you're prepping your meals. On Wednesdays, we have a Wednesday night Bible study. Fridays, we always do a movie night. In the tumult of our weekly schedule, is there really a point in establishing a routine? Sophie's going to be joining us for the podcast because she was not happy. And so if you hear little baby noises, that's why. But the answer is yes. We need a strong evening routine because our schedules, they're the guide for our day. They help calm the chaos of life. And though our evenings can be full of change, when we have a schedule, it can help us to support our goals. And again, these are goals that are not necessarily personal goals. It's not maybe your exercise routine. These are goals about what you want your family to look like, what you want your church community to look like, what you want your friendships to look like. And so I think these are all the more worthwhile because a lot of these things are the things that go on the back burner in our modern day life. I think keeping this in mind, it's helpful to think of our evening routines in two parts. So we have our weekly routine and our daily routine. So when we start to create our routines, we need to look at our current schedule. So what do your evenings currently look like? Think about what you do from the moment that you get home from work. Again, if you're like a stay-at-home mom like me or you work at home, this would be when kind of the work for the day is done. Maybe your homeschooling is done. Maybe your kids come home from school or you're done with the homeschool. And I would say a lot of times for us, this would start around dinner time. So around that transition to that daily routine of dinner. And I would write out, if I'm trying to look at what my current evening routine is, I would write out our regular commitments that we have on a weekly calendar, keeping those monthly events in mind too. If you have a book club, or maybe you have a women's group that meets once a month, or something like that, these would be things that you would also want to write down. And then I would also want you to mark open time that you have on your schedule. So when are you normally home? This would be the time that you would have that you could work on your daily and weekly routines. What we're going to do is we're going to look at those two parts of our evening routine, our weekly routines and our daily routines. And we're going to talk about what you can do with those to create a solid routine that helps you accomplish the goals that you have. So to do this, I think we have to think about kind of the modern expectations for what family life looks like. So we live in a time that's characterized by rushing. The average student, public school student, spends 5 hours a week on extracurricular activities. So again, they're in school about 30 hours or so, 38 hours a week. And so when it comes to sports, over 50% of kids play a sport between the ages of 10 and 17, with an average amount of time being spent at practice and games being between 15 and 20 hours a week in each season. So, experts are saying really you should only spend the age that you are. So a 10-year-old should only spend 10 hours a week on sports. But often kids are spending more time, and sometimes kids, they are spending that time on practice. But on top of that, they may be doing other things as well, like physical therapy and training and things like that to help with those sports as well. For the average public school student, free time really only comes on evenings, and that equals roughly 20 to 25 hours per week, not including the weekends. And so this is the time that kids have to play games, do homework, eat, and do everything else. And so with the addition of those extracurriculars, like I just talked about, this time is in short supply. They really don't have that much time. And so we, as the parents, often act as chauffeurs for our kids as we go from one thing to the next. And our time is even more limited than theirs is if we don't get home from work until close to 6 p.m. It's like you go, maybe you pick up your kids from school or daycare or sports practice. You have to make dinner, clean the house, get ready. And really, you might only have maybe an hour of restful time before you need to start transitioning to go to bed. There's some people, that's why they stay up later and they're not getting that quality sleep because they don't really just have that time. We have few precious hours with our family. And If you've ever worked different shifts from your spouse, you know what it feels like to be shifts passing in the night. Constantly rushing from one thing to the next time without connection is a recipe for feeling drained and discontent. It's a recipe for feeling disconnected from your family. And honestly, this is why I think a lot of families, that family culture is not there. People are turning to their work friends, kids are turning to their public school friends, or their other connections that they have, maybe online. And that family unit connection is just not there. But it's because we're a family that is never home, because we have all of these pressures from life to be involved with other things. So how can we redeem our time? Well, one option is to create a more flexible work schedule for yourself to steal back some of the hours for your family. Another option is to choose to homeschool, which that gives your children the gift of ample time throughout the day. But both of these often require a significant lifestyle change that not everybody can do. So I think to make an immediate impact on the pace of your days, you need to set up a schedule that includes margin in your evenings. Your evenings should be that precious time for connection, and every activity that your family does or doesn't do needs to be held up against your values. Does this thing match the thing that I want to be teaching my family? Setting boundaries also means that we need to place limits on our schedule. We have a lot of good opportunities that are available to us now. Even all those things I mentioned with sports, all of these things are good things, but too much of a good thing can become a terrible thing. There was one girl that I went to high school with that she was on the basketball team. She took AP classes. Eventually she became, I think she was salutatorian. She tutored, she volunteered at her church, and she did lots of other things. And at one point we were talking and she was like, yeah, I'm just so glad, it's kind of bad, but whenever I get to school, it's like a break from my life. And this is the same school, where she's taking all these AP classes and trying to get the highest grade in the class. She would shuffle off with her 30-pound backpack to the next thing. And really, I think that this is kind of like the goal. Like, you have this desire for people to be involved in so much that they never get a break. And so I think as parents, we're responsible not only for the curation of our technology and media that our kids consume, but we're also responsible for curating the time of our kids. Curation basically means that we choose the best of what to give our kids. And so we try to be mindful of the ways that we are developing their schedules. Yes, by the time that our kids are 15, 16, 17, they're probably choosing their own schedule. Maybe they're choosing if they want to do sports or, spend their time in other ways. But a lot of us, we're getting our kids involved in a lot of these things at a very young age. And so we need to choose how we're curating our kids' schedules. We want them to cultivate good habits and skills. And we also want to help them pursue the most impactful things in their lives. And that's going to require you to really think about what you're cultivating in your kids. So I would take some time to write out your non-negotiables. And here's some things to get you thinking. First, how do you feel about family meal times? Last season, we had an episode where we talked about the importance of sitting around the dinner table and having those family meal times for discipleship. So how can you try to get to the dinner table and turn off your screens at the dinner table for several meals throughout the week? And honestly, this is one of the things that impacts your kids, I think, the most, is that daily, consistent, just meeting together, because that is going to be the thing that ultimately is going to cultivate those relationships. Also, you need to think about what extracurricular activities are worthwhile. So sports, music, clubs. Do you place limits on the different types of activities that your kids are involved in? And what about the days that these events take place and the cost? Travel ball is expensive, and there's actually some people, I listened to different podcasts, and there was one person who was on the 1,000 Hours Outside podcast. And one of the things that they said is like, there are parents who are literally taking out loans in order to pay for the sports that their kids are involved in. And these are not kids that are going to be, going pro. These are just parents who they are getting their kids involved in so many sports that they've kind of gotten caught up in this wave where, and these kids are getting so injured that they have to give up the sport at such a young age. At 15, 16 years old, they're so injured that they can't continue to play. So, you need to think about what you value. Now, if you are single or you don't have kids, then you also can think about what is worthwhile. you could still have meal times with someone. It doesn't have to be family meal times. It could be somebody who is a friend or somebody from your church. But you also can think about the values that you have as far as do you place value on sports? Do you place value on going out with your friends? What are some of the things that you do in your evenings that are these things worthwhile or are they not worthwhile? How are you filling up your hours in your day? You also need to ask yourself, what are your boundaries with screens at homes? Do your kids have time limits on screens? Do you have a time limit on your screens? Those are important questions to ask for how you're spending your time. You also need to think about the church activities that you want to be involved in throughout the week. Which do you feel are important to attend? It might not be everything, especially if your church is really active. You might not be able to go to everything, but what do you think are the most important things for you and your family to be a part of? And how often do you get together with friends and family throughout the week? What about your kids? How often do they see friends? The connections that they make online, those do not replace face-to-face conversations with friends. So how often are you trying to connect them with their friends to cultivate those connections? And then lastly, ask yourself, what time are you devoting to your spouse if you're married? Do you have a weekly date night? What about a daily time to talk each day to try to connect with them so that you aren't ships passing through the night? Even if you work on the same schedule, or even if, one spouse works outside the home and one spouse is a stay-at-home mom or dad, you could still feel like you are just missing each other because you are so busy with everything else. So you have to take that intentional time to connect. I think creating a life-giving schedule in your evenings means that you're creating habits with your schedule, that you try to do certain things each week in order to prioritize what you value. So after you go through those questions that I just asked, you need to ask yourself, okay, out of these things, what does this show me about what I value? And then how can I create habits that match the values that I have? So one habit could be a weekly Sabbath. I think everybody should have that habit. You can think about how you want that Sabbath to look. Some people is just, they go to church and maybe try to connect with friends or family or have a meal at home together. Some people, they completely turn off, all of their devices. Basically, they turn off their Wi-Fi and they're not on screens at all on the Sabbath. Some people say, okay, we can't go shopping, and they try to spend that time at home. So Sabbath is going to look different for every person. Some people, they decide to start their Sabbath on basically like Saturday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. So they have Sunday evenings to prep and get ready for the week. So Sabbath will look different from everyone, but you need to think about what you want that to look like for you and your family. For us, we do a weekly movie or board game night each week. You could also have one date night with your spouse. Justin Whitmore, early in his book, he also recommends some habits. So one weekly conversation with a friend. So he tries to get together with a friend each week. He has a standing conversation where some of his friends will come over to his house and they get together around the fire pit and they just talk each week to try to connect with those people. And then he also gets together with his family on every Sabbath. So basically every Sunday they get together at somebody's house and they just hang out that evening. So their kids play together and then they just have some time where they can connect with each other. So again, these things are ways that you can build in the connection that you want to see, that you value in your life. You build that into your life through habits. So importantly, what you have to do is you have to look at your current schedule and evaluate if what your schedule is doing for you right now, if it matches your values. And if it doesn't match your values, you need to think of habits that can help it to match that. As you look at your weekly evening schedule, what you're doing is you are creating those habits and you're evaluating what maybe you could keep and take away to give you some space to create daily habits that are also going to help you to achieve those goals of connection. So I think this can be done by establishing some parameters around our schedule. So when do we want to be home from work or school? If you are somebody who works long hours, that's going to be something that if you know that every day you want to have some time to connect with your family, then what you would need to do is you need to say, okay, there needs to be a stopping point each day where I can't work so late that I'm not going to be able to be home and see my kids before they go to bed. So another question you could ask is, when should dinner be ready and at the table? And what time should you be in bed each night? So as you establish this, what you're doing is you're establishing parameters around your schedule that sets boundaries for when certain things are going to happen each day. Then you can develop routines for different components in the evenings. So dinner time would be one component that you have each week or each day. Evening occupation. So this would be things like go to sports. Do you play board games? Do you take care of animals? Do you try to go outside in the evenings? All of those things would be evening occupations. And then lastly, you would have your bedtime routines. So dinner time really should look pretty similar each evening. So I recognize this isn't the case for a lot of families today, but there are so many positive benefits for sitting at the table each night. It creates a better connection between your kids, which leads to higher life outcomes for them. And it can also provide a time for family discipleship through devotions and Bible readings. And it's a lot cheaper because you're avoiding eating out each night. Cooking at home also makes it healthier than fast food if you're mindful of what you're making. So dinner time is going to involve that time for cooking, eating, and cleaning up, and you could add maybe some household chores to that time. Meal planning and prepping can make it a lot easier to do this, as well as crock-pot meals. But dinner time, I really think, should be kind of a non-negotiable. Granted, again, you won't do this every night, and some nights will look different. Like we have a dinner at our church, and so that's a great time for connection with your church community. But that means that our Wednesdays look a little bit different, but that's okay because we've planned for that. That's something that matches the values that we have. To do this, you just need to be mindful of how you are prioritizing that mealtime. That's saying, okay, this is something that is a non-negotiable, so I'm going to do the work to make it happen. Again, your evening occupations are going to be probably the most flexible and varied part of your routines. And it's going to depend a lot on the commitments that you have. But again, this would be that time to foster connection, hang out at the park. Maybe it's a time just to sit by the fire and read a book. I think one of the things that can be a really great habit to have is to unplug from work and mindless entertainment during this time. So maybe you would put your computer away, put your phone away, and just do something that fills you up. This could be a great time to do your hobbies that you want to do. We've talked about how each person should really have 5 hobbies, but if your days are taken up by work, your hobbies are really going to be evening routines or weekend things that you do. And so you would need to think about how you can incorporate that into your life and just schedule for that. And then lastly, you need to create a solid bedtime routine. So again, this is going to be something that kind of mirrors your morning routine, in that it's kind of an individual thing. So after you created that time for connection with your family, then you start to focus in on yourself. And again, it's that time for rest and relaxation, to unplug and unwind. And really that's going to help you get better sleep and feel ready to tackle the next day. So some things that highly successful people do each evening is a lot of these highly successful businessmen and women, they unplug completely from their phones for at least 30 minutes before bed. So they put their phone to bed. Justin Whitmore Early also recommends doing this every day. And then they do some kind of gentle evening exercise, like maybe an evening walk or stretching, and then they decompress. So again, you need to establish boundaries around your work where you don't work just until you like literally fall over and fall into bed. So maybe what this means is that you have a time where you do maybe a brain dump from your work, you create a to-do list, you do your schedule. So if you check in with your planner, you would decompress from work and then your work is done. You're not going to think about it anymore. They also spend time with their family, they read, and they have a hygiene ritual. So again, it's good to wash your face every night, especially if you are a girl and you wear makeup. You also need to, you maybe want to shower, take care of yourself. And so this would be something that you could do to create a good bedtime routine. Keeping this list in mind, how can you make space for yourself to unplug and unwind? You want to think about these 3 things as you're creating your evening routine: decompression, hygiene, and relaxation. And then lastly, you really want to establish a actual bedtime. So this is one of the things that is the most important for setting up your mornings well, is that you need to say, okay, if I want to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, then I need to go to bed at a certain time, probably between 9 and 10 at night. And so if I want to go to bed at 9 and 10, I need to start working towards that bedtime each night. If you are like, oh, I just want to look at my phone, I'm not tired, so I'm just going to look at my phone. until I get sleepy, really that just keeps you up longer because of the light on the phone and just the way that your phones are wired. Also, if you try to snack at night, a lot of people, if they stay up past 9 or, later, they start to get hungry and so they snack. And really, again, that can be bad for your health and your waistline, but it can be bad for your sleep. And so you're not going to get up as early. So you need to set a time for your bedtime routine. And if you're not tired, the best thing to do is, I would say, get a book and read a book. Depending on the book that you choose, you might find that you're falling asleep a little bit earlier. Some people with novels, they stay up really late, but you could get a good nonfiction book and you might fall asleep real quick. So I would just recommend that you get into this routine and you make it a priority to say you're going to be in bed at a certain time each night. So your evening routines, they're so important. They can help you to wrap up your current day, to connect with your family and friends, and to have a better night's sleep. Over the weeks and months, a solid evening routine can be life-changing because instead of feeling harried and racing from one thing to the next, an evening routine can make you feel calm, connected, and centered. They're really about establishing boundaries and about curating your time. You have to decide what you value with your time in your evening routines, and you have to build routines that reflect those values. In choosing how we spend our time, we're choosing to cultivate those values in our lives, and this can have a ripple effect because it'll cultivate those values in your children, with your spouse. It can also, if you are as you extend your connection beyond just your family, it can also help to cultivate those values of connection in your friends and family as well. So I'd love to know what your evening routine looks like. You can comment below. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving a rating and review that helps others find the show. You can also subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And don't forget, if you like these podcasts, you could also watch the video version on YouTube. You can also donate at the website. If you go to the website, amorebeautiful.collective.com, and click donate, you can also check out all of the resources that we have in our shop, including our ideal schedule guide, which you can find a link to in the show notes. Until next time, keep creating a life you love and cultivating your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I hope we'll see you next week.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. If you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts to help others find the show. While you're there, you can like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out the blog and our store for more encouragement and resources on how to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I'll see you next week.